I have a feeling that if you are listening to this, you're not here because you want another habit. You're not here because you need more discipline or another routine or another version of yourself to aspire to. You're here because something feels off, and it is subtle. Because from the outside, you are probably doing a lot of things right. You have read a lot of books. You have read the books. You have done the work. You have reflected. You have tried to grow. Maybe you even look together to other people. But yet, inside, there is still a dissatisfaction that you cannot quite name. And that is not a crisis. It is not despair. It is just low, steady sense of, is this really it? Why doesn't this feel the way I thought it would? And what makes it even harder is that there is nothing obviously wrong. So you don't feel justified feeling this way. You tell yourself you should be grateful, you should be motivated, you should just try harder. And that is usually the moment people reach for self-improvement. Usually the moment people reach for another habit, for another system, and for another way to optimize themselves. But I want to say something. I want to say something clearly here. This feeling you are having is not a motivation problem. It is not that you are lazy. It is not that you lack discipline. And it is not that you are broken. It is that your life doesn't feel like it makes sense to you anymore. Okay? That is important. It doesn't make sense to you. And no habit can fix that. And I hear this all the time. I hear it from clients. I hear it from people who look successful. I hear it from people who have done the work. And all of them say the same thing. They say that I don't want another morning routine. I don't want to optimize myself anymore. I'm tired of fixing. I just want my life to make sense. And that sentence right there, I want my life to make sense, is one of the most honest things a person can say. And it has nothing to do with productivity. Because when life makes sense, you don't need to force yourself forward. You don't need to hype yourself up. You don't need to constantly push. Movement, it will become natural. But when life doesn't make sense, even small things, they will feel heavy, and decisions are going to drain you, motivation disappear, and you start questioning yourself in ways you did not question yourself before. And that is not because you are failing, it is because your internal compass is tired. And here is what I want you to hear, and I want you to really let this land. If you feel quietly dissatisfied, even though you're doing all the right things, if you're tired of optimizing, of fixing, and of upgrading yourself, and if you are craving something deeper than performance or progress, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not regressing. You're not losing discipline. What you are is that you are outgrowing a way of living that no longer feels meaningful. And that moment, that subtle turning point, is actually a sign of maturity, not a sign of weakness. And most people, they will just ignore this feeling. They will drown it out with more doing, and they will keep on chasing the next version of themselves and just hoping that that version will finally feel settled. But some people pause. And if you're listening to this, I suspect that you are one of those people. This episode is not here to motivate you. It will probably motivate you, but it's not here to push you. And it is definitely not here to tell you how to become better. It is here to sit with the question you have been carrying. What am I actually doing all of this for? Because real change doesn't start with habits. It starts with meaning. And meaning isn't something you add to your life like a productivity tool. Meaning is something that reorganizes how you live, how you choose, and how you respond. So, if you have been feeling like, I don't want another habit, I don't want to optimize myself anymore, and I want my life to make sense, I want you to know that you are not alone in that, and you're not behind. You are standing at the edge of a deeper conversation. So for now, just let yourself arrive here. You don't need to figure anything out while listening to this episode. You don't need to take notes. You don't need to decide what this means for your life yet. Just stay with me, because I want to talk about why so much self-help and change advice stops working at exactly this stage of life, and what is actually missing when people say they want their life to change. And I think that you will recognize yourself here. There is something important we need to name. We need to name it honestly. Most self-help isn't failing because it is wrong. It is failing because it is incomplete. Modern self-help is obsessed with how to wake up earlier, how to build habits, how to stay disciplined, how to be productive, how to optimize your life. And for a while, especially in earlier phases of life, this works. This works perfectly. Structure helps when you are lost. Habits help when you are scattered, and discipline helps when you are avoiding. I'm not here to dismiss any of that. It helps. But there comes a point, and that point often comes quietly, where these tools stop working. Not because you stopped trying, but because you started asking a different question. Instead of, how do I improve my life? The question becomes, why am I living this life at all? And no habits answer that. And here's what I see again and again and again. People say they want to change their life. They say they want more motivation, more consistency, more drive, but that is not actually what they are asking for. When people say they want to change their life, they usually mean they want their life to feel coherent again, like their choices make sense, and like their effort has a direction, like their energy isn't leaking all over the place. Coherence is not a productivity issue. It is a meaning issue. And this is where the modern self-help just misses the mark, because it assumes the problem is performance, so it gives you tools to perform better. What if the real problem is that you don't know what you are doing this for anymore? You can have the perfect routine and you can still feel empty. You can be disciplined and you can still feel restless. And you can be productive and you can still feel misaligned. And that is because habits don't create meaning. They amplify whatever meaning already exists. And if meaning is missing, habits, they just makes that emptiness louder. This is where people get confused, because they think, I just need more motivation. But motivation without direction is just nervous energy. Let's talk about this from a nervous system perspective for a moment, because this is where it really clicks. When your life lacks meaning, like not dramatic meaning, but felt meaning, your nervous system stays in a state of low-grade stress. So not panic, not crisis, it's just constant subtle tension, always there. Like you wake up and you already feel tired, and your decisions feel heavy, and small tasks, they drain you more than they should. And that's not because you are weak, but because your system doesn't know why it is mobilizing energy. And the nervous system needs a reason to engage. It needs orientation. It needs to know, what is this effort in service of? When meaning is missing, your system treats everything as potentially threatening or pointless. So it resists, it procrastinates, it shuts down. This is why nothing sticks. Not because you're inconsistent, but because your body does not feel oriented. Meaning does something very specific in the nervous system. It creates internal regulation under pressure. When you know why you're doing something, effort feels so much cleaner, and discomfort feels tolerable, and challenges do not feel personal. But without meaning, every obstacle, it feels like proof, like something is wrong. But with meaning, obstacles become part of the path. This is the difference between surface level change and existential change. Surface level change asks, how do I do this better? Existential change asks, why does this matter enough for me to stay? And the uncomfortable truth in this is that a lot of modern self-help keeps people busy. So the people don't have to ask that deeper question. Because asking that deeper question, that asking what actually matters to me, what is worth my energy, what kind of life feels honest to live, that can destabilize things. It can change relationships. It can change careers, identities. So instead, we optimize. We track habits. We chase discipline. And we convince ourselves that once we are quote unquote better, life will finally feel right. But if you have reached the stage where self-improvement feels exhausting instead of empowering, that's a signal. It's not failure. It's just a signal. It is a signal that you are ready for a deeper layer of change. A layer that doesn't start with behavior, but a layer that starts with meaning. Because when meaning is clear, habits become supportive instead of oppressive. And discipline becomes natural instead of forced. And productivity, that becomes a byproduct, not a demand anymore. And this is why people who find meaning often looks and feel calmer. Not more motivated, but calmer. More selective, less reactive, less willing to waste energy on things that do not align. And that is what most people are actually craving. Not a better system, but a life that makes sense from the inside out. So if you have been wondering why the tools that used to work do not work anymore, if you have been feeling like you are doing everything right, but nothing is landing, this might be why. You're not lacking discipline. You are lacking orientation. And once orientation is restored, everything else reorganizes around it. I want to introduce a book now. And I want to do it carefully, because this isn't the kind of book you get excited about in the usual way. It's not the kind of book you casually recommend on a list or in a story slide. And it's definitely not a book you read because you want to feel motivated. In fact, if I'm honest, this is a book I don't recommend lightly. It is not trendy. It is not aesthetic. It won't give you language you can post or like a quote to feel better about your life. And I don't think it will hype you into change. The book I'm talking about is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I want to be very clear about what this book is not. This book is not self-help in the modern sense. It is not about habits. It is not about optimization. It is not about becoming a better version of yourself. It doesn't try to make you feel good. It tries to make you honest. Most books today begin with a familiar question. Most books begin with, what do you want? What kind of life do you want to create? What are your goals? And those questions have their place. But Frankl asks something else entirely, something much more grounding and something much more uncomfortable. He asks, what is worth staying alive for, even when life hurts? And that question, I get goosebumps. It just lands different in the body. Oh, it feels so alive. Whew, it doesn't energize you. It steadies you. Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived concentration camps. And I'm not saying that for shock value or drama. I'm saying it because it matters. Because the philosophy wasn't formed in comfort or in clarity or in safety. It was formed under extreme suffering. And what Frankl observed wasn't what you might expect. People didn't survive because they were the most optimistic or the most disciplined or the most mentally strong. They survived because they had meaning. Something or someone that their life was orienting toward, and so something that made suffering bearable. This is why I say this isn't a book people recommend lightly, because once you read it, you cannot go back to asking shallow questions about your life. It doesn't ask, how do I get more out of life? It asks, what actually makes life worth living when circumstances do not cooperate? And if you are listening to this at a point where you feel tired of self-improvement, if you're done trying to motivate yourself into alignment, and if you're quietly questioning what all of this is even for, this book doesn't give you answers. It gives you orientation. And after reading it, people don't usually say, I feel inspired. They say, I see my life differently. They say, I am less reactive, I'm more selective, I'm less willing to waste my energy. This book does not add pressure. It removes noise, and it strips things down to what actually matters. And in doing so, it gives your nervous system something solid to organize around. And that is why it is effective, because it doesn't tell you what to do, but because it clarifies what is worth doing. And if you have been trying to change your life through effort alone, if you have been building habits without a deeper reason to stay, and if you have felt like motivation keeps slipping through your fingers, this book shows you why. You were never lacking discipline. You were lacking an access. I don't recommend Man's Searches for Meaning to everyone. I recommend it to the people who are ready to take their life seriously. People who are ready to ask, what am I willing to suffer for? What gives my life enough meaning that I do not abandon myself when things get hard? If those questions feel alive in you, just even quietly, this book will meet you exactly where you are. There is one core insight in Frankl's work that changes how you see everything else. And it is so simple. Frankl observed that human beings are organizing their life around one of three things: pleasure, power, or meaning. Most of us move between all of these three without realizing it. And we chase pleasure when we are tired or when we are numb. And we chase power when we feel insecure or when we feel unseen. And we search for meaning when something deeper is missing. Pleasure says, if I feel good enough, life will be okay. Power says, if I'm successful enough, if I'm respected enough, if I have accomplished enough, I will feel safe. Meaning, it says something else entirely. Meaning says that even if life hurts, there is a reason to stay. And that difference is everything. Pleasure is fragile. It depends on circumstances staying comfortable. And the moment discomfort appears, like stress, loss, uncertainty, pleasure collapses. And when a life is built primarily around pleasure, suffering feels like failure. And power is also fragile because power depends on control. It depends on status. It depends on achievement. It depends on things going according to plan. And the moment life humbles you, like through illness, through heartbreak, through uncertainty or burnout, power collapses too. But meaning is different. Meaning does not depend on comfort. It does not depend on control. It does not even depend on happiness. Frankl saw that people who had meaning could endure incredible suffering without losing their inner orientation. Not because they enjoyed it, not because they were strong, but because the suffering had context. So meaning doesn't mean that life becomes easy. It makes life bearable. And that alone explains so much about modern life. Because we live in a culture that chases pleasure and also chases power relentlessly. Optimize your body, optimize your mind, optimize your career, optimize your happiness, optimization everywhere. And yet anxiety is rising. Burnout is everywhere. And people feel lost even when they are successful. Why? Because without meaning, the nervous system has nothing stable to organize around. Let's talk about all of this, but in the body for a moment. When life feels meaningless, not dramatically, but subtly, the nervous system stays in a state of vigilance. So it is constantly scanning for what's the point? What am I doing this for? What am I moving forward? And without answers, the body cannot relax. It mobilizes energy without direction. That is what anxiety is. Energy without orientation. This is exactly why people burn out even when they love what they do. This is why successful people wake up feeling empty. And this is why productivity feels exhausting instead of satisfying. It is not because they are doing too much. It is because the effort isn't anchored in meaning. Meaning does something very specific to the nervous system. It gives suffering a frame. It allows the body to say, this is hard, but it's not pointless. And that changes everything. When suffering feels pointless, the body panics. But when suffering has meaning, the body can regulate. Not because the pain disappears, but because it makes sense. And this is why people who know why they're doing something, that they can tolerate discomfort far better than people who do not. They don't spiral as quickly. They don't personalize every obstacle, and they don't abandon themselves at the first sign of resistance. Meaning reorganizes priorities. When meaning is clear, you stop wasting energy. You stop saying yes to things that drain you. You stop chasing validation. You stop performing versions of yourself that do not align. Not because you're disciplined, but because your system becomes selective. This is why people often describe a sense of calm after encountering real meaning. Not excitement, but calm. They don't suddenly want more, they want less, but they want truer. Think about burnout for a moment. Burnout isn't just about workload. It is about misaligned effort. It is what happens when your nervous system is asked to give and give and give and give without understanding why. And modern anxiety, so often, it is not fear of failure. It is fear that none of this actually matters. Frankl understood this long before we even had language for nervous system. He saw that when people lost meaning, their will to live collapsed, even if conditions improved. And when people retain meaning, they could endure almost anything. And this does not mean that we go out and seek suffering. It means that we stop pretending life will be painless. Meaning doesn't promise comfort. It promises coherence. And coherence is what the nervous system craves. This is why so many people today feel restless. They have been taught to chase pleasure and to chase power, but no one taught them how to anchor meaning. They ask, what do I want? What will make me happy? But happiness without meaning just is fleeting up here. And Frankl didn't ask what would make life pleasant. He asked what would make life worth living. And that question changes how you respond. When meaning is present, failure does not destroy you. Discomfort does not derail you. Uncertainty does not feel like danger. It feels like part of the path. And this is what settles something deep in people. Not answers, not orientation. If you have been feeling lost even though you are successful, and if you are exhausted even though your life looks very good, and if anxiety keeps surfacing without a clear reason, this might be why. Your nervous system is not broken, but your nervous system is asking for meaning. And once meaning enters the picture, life doesn't suddenly become easy. It becomes bearable. And bearable is where rebuilding begins. I want to talk now about what this book actually does to people. Not in theory, not philosophically, but in the way it shows up afterwards, like in real life. Because this is very important. People don't finish man's search for meaning feeling hyped up. They don't feel energized in that buzzy, motivational way. They don't want to overhaul their life overnight. They don't suddenly feel ambitious. In fact, it's almost the opposite. They feel quieter. And at first, that can feel strange. Because we are used to thinking that change should feel loud, that transformation should come with excitement, with urgency, with momentum. But this book does not do that. What it does is that it turns the volume down on everything that does not matter. So people that read this book after I recommended it to them, they've told me that, like, I don't feel more motivated, but I feel clearer. I feel calm, and I suddenly know what I am not available for anymore. And isn't that a big shift? Like, after reading this book, people become more selective. They become more self-respecting. They become less reactive. Not because they are trying to be, but because something just reorganized inside them. They stop chasing things that used to drain them. They stop tolerating misalignment. They don't need to justify themselves so much anymore. They don't need to explain every choice. They don't need to keep pushing just to prove something. And that is when you realizing something really important. This book, it doesn't add ambition. It removes noise. It removes the internal pressure to perform a life that doesn't feel true. It removes the constant background hum of, am I doing enough? Am I falling behind? Should I want more? And when that noise disappears, what is left is clarity. Not clarity about everything, but clarity about what matters. Some people have said that after reading this book, they start making smaller decisions differently. So not big dramatic life changes, but the subtle ones. So they leave conversations earlier and they stop agreeing to things out of guilt. They say no without rehearsing explanations, and they choose rest without justifying it as productive. And the most interesting thing is that your life becomes more simple, more alive. And this is why I say it doesn't motivate you. It reorganizes you. Motivation, it pushes you forward, but reorganization, it changes what pulls you forward. And when you are reorganized by meaning, you don't need to hype yourself up. You don't need to convince yourself to care. You just care about different things. And this is why people who have encountered real meaning, they look calmer. They're not more driven. They look calmer. They look more grounded. They're not willing to waste time anymore. And if you're listening to this thinking, I want that clarity, that makes sense. Because clarity isn't something you can force. It comes when the noise settles. And what I've noticed is that when people have read this book, is what is happening is that they stop asking, what should I be doing? And they start asking, what is actually worth my energy? And that question of what is actually worth my energy, it changes how you work. It changes how you relate. It changes how you rest. And it changes how you make decisions. And it doesn't happen because the book tells you what to choose. It happens because the book gives you its center. And from that center, misalignment becomes uncomfortable. So it will be unbearable for you. Like you don't shame yourself. You don't force change. But you simply notice when something doesn't fit anymore. Now, I just want to bring this back to change, not philosophical change, not insight, but lived change. The kind people try to make every year and also abandon every year. Because this is where most people get stuck. They understand the ideas, they have read the books, they have listened to the podcast, and still nothing sticks. And I want to talk you through why that is happening. And it is simple as habits collapse without meaning. You can build routines from discipline for a while. You can force consistency for a while. You can rely on willpower for a while. But without meaning, those structures eventually will feel hollow. And when something feels hollow, the nervous system stops cooperating. So this is why people are going to say, I just can't stay consistent. I always fall off. I keep starting over. And it's not because they lack commitment. Maybe they are so committed, but their inner compass is spiraling. So then this is why people say, like, I just can't stay consistent and I keep falling off. I keep starting over, and they feel like, yeah, I'm not committed enough. But it's not because they lack commitment. It's because their inner compass is spinning. Discipline fails when life feels empty. Because discipline is effort, and effort needs a reason. When life feels empty, every task feels heavier than it should. You have to convince yourself to show up. You negotiate with yourself constantly. And eventually, you stop. This is also why people keep on starting over. They don't actually want a fresh start. They want a fresh sense of meaning. So they change habits, they change jobs, they change routines, they change goals, but the disorientation stays. Let's look at how this shows up in real life. So I'm gonna start off with relationships. So how this shows up in relationships is that when meaning is unclear, people tolerate misalignment for far too long. They stay in conversations that drain them. They over-explain and they compromise themselves just to keep the peace. But when meaning is clear, when you know what kind of life and love you are oriented toward, something shifts. You stop chasing connection that cost you yourself. You choose honesty. You choose it over harmony. And how does this show up in work? In work, when meaning is missing, work becomes survival. You push, you perform, you burn out, even if you are successful. But when meaning is present, work becomes contribution. You become more selective, you care, but you do not overextend. You give your energy where it actually matters. And how this shows up when it comes to the self, like in self-trust, this is a big one. When meaning is unclear here, you do not trust yourself. You second guess every decision. So this spills out in all categories of your life. You look outside yourself for answers. You start and stop constantly. But when meaning is clear here, self-trust stabilizes. And not because you suddenly know everything, but because you know what you are oriented toward, that you can make mistakes and you can make them without collapsing. And this also shows up in the nervous system, and this is where it all ties together. Meaning creates safety. Not comfort, but safety. When the nervous system knows why you are doing something, it relaxes and it stops scanning for danger. It stops bracing. That is when change becomes sustainable, because your body is no longer fighting your intentions. This is why people who find meaning often move slower, but they go so much further. They are not rushing to prove anything. They're not building on panic. They are building on coherence. And this might be the realization that lands the hardest. You haven't been failing at change. You have been trying to build without a foundation. No amount of habits can replace orientation. No amount of discipline can replace meaning. No amount of effort can replace coherence. Once meaning is restored, habits make sense. Discipline feels supportive. Change stops feeling like self-violence. You don't need to try harder. You need to know why it matters enough to stay. That is the inner compass. And once it is calibrated, you don't keep starting over. You keep moving, even when it's hard. Once meaning is clear, people ask the same question. Okay, but how do I move now? And this is where I want to be careful, because this is the moment where people often undo everything they have just grounded, because they start to rush back into strategy and they start grabbing the next plan and they start designing before they're oriented. And that is how people build impressive lives, but the lives that still feel empty. So I want to say this clearly. Meaning first, design second. Always. And there is another book I often recommend after someone has done the deeper orientation work, not instead of it, but after. And that book is Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And this book is very, very different from Frankel's. It is not existential and it is not confronting. It is not meant to shake you. This book is meant to help you move. But this book only works when meaning is already present. Otherwise, you just design a more efficient version of a life that doesn't fit you. So, what designing your life offers isn't pressure, but it offers experimentation. Not decide your future, but try small things and see how your body responds. That is so freaking powerful because it removes the fear of getting it right. It replaces commitment with curiosity. So instead of asking, is this the path? You ask, does this feel alive? Does this drain me or does this energize me? And do I feel more like myself here or do I feel less like myself here? And that is how aligned movement actually happens. It doesn't happen through forcing decisions. It happens through the feedback. And you have to ask the right question to find the right feedback. And this book gives people the permission to test instead of commit, and to explore instead of decide, and to move without collapsing into pressure. And that is important. That is so important because once meaning is clear, movement doesn't need to be aggressive. It just needs to be honest. So this is where panic often disappears because the stakes are lower. You're no longer trying to design your entire life. You're just listening. You're trying something. You're noticing how it feels. Then you're adjusting. And this is what creates momentum. That doesn't burn you out because your nervous system is embracing, it is participating. Designing a life only works when you know why you are designing it. Without the meaning, design becomes control. With meaning, design becomes collaboration. It's a collaboration between you and your body and between desire and capacity. Before we close today, there is just one more thing that I want to say, and it matters more than people realize. How you read a book like this is just as important as the book itself. Because if you approach it the way we are taught to approach information, like fast, efficient, productive, you are going to miss the very thing it is trying to give you. This is not a book to binge. It is not a book to highlight aggressively. It is not a book to get through. This is a book to sit with. I would say read 10 to 15 pages at a time. That's it. Then you stop. And it's not because this book is dense. It is not dense, but it is a book that works on you quietly. You might feel unsettled after reading. You may not feel inspired, not uplifted, but you're feeling thoughtful and you feel quieter and maybe you feel a little uncomfortable even. And it is important for me to mention that discomfort is not a problem. It is the point. When a book touches meaning, it doesn't excite the nervous system. It reorganizes it. And reorganization takes space. So after you read, do not rush back into your life. Do not immediately reach for your phone. Just sit with it for a moment. Notice what stayed with you. Notice what softened. Notice what suddenly feels less important than it did before. You don't need to analyze it. Please do not overanalyze it. You don't need to journal perfectly. Just let your system register the shift. This is especially important if you are someone who are used to doing the work, if you are really good at self-improvement, if you're really used to turning everything into action. This book isn't asking for action. It is asking for orientation. Before we end today, I want to leave you with something. I don't want to leave you with a lesson, not a directive, not something you need to do next. Just want to leave a little reflection. If this conversation touched something in you, If you felt quieter rather than energized, and if you felt seen rather than motivated, that is not by accident. That is meaning doing its work. So often people walk away from conversations like this and ask, okay, well, what should I do now? And the honest answer to that is, you don't need to do anything right away. You do not need to change your life overnight. You do not need to make a decision. You do not need to turn this into action. If anything, this is an invitation to stop rushing yourself into answers, to stop forcing clarity, to stop demanding certainty before you are ready. Meaning does not ask you to hurry. It asks you to stay with the question, to stay with what stirred, and to stay with what softened. If you do choose to read this book, or if you choose to read any book that touches meaning, let it meet you where you are, not as something to consume, but something to sit beside you. And if you don't read it right now, that's okay too. Sometimes just knowing that meaning exists is enough to begin reorienting your life. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need a plan. You don't need to know where this is all going. You just need to keep on asking the right questions, the ones that feel honest in your body. Questions like, what actually matters to me now? What is worth my energy? What helps me stay with myself when things get uncomfortable? Those questions will guide you more faithfully than any habit or strategy ever could. So wherever you are right now, walking, resting, sitting quietly, take a breath. Nothing is required of you in this moment. You're allowed to move slowly. You're allowed to take meaning seriously. You're allowed to build a life that makes sense to you. Thank you for being here with me, for listening, and for staying. And until next time, stay aligned, stay curious, and most important of all, stay true to yourself.